Hi everyone, I'm Alex Rozenfeld, founder of Freshwater Investments, and this is Coffee with the T-Bird podcast. I sit down with fellow T-Birds who are making an impact in business, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Each episode features conversations that explore the pivotal moments, personal motivations, and lessons learned on their journeys. Whether you're a student, alum, or someone passionate about business and personal growth, you'll walk away with fresh ideas. This is a bit more than a podcast. It's a platform for connections, storytelling, and celebrating the global spirit of Thunderbird. This podcast is sponsored by Freshwater Investments. At Freshwater, we make it simple for you to invest in large apartment communities across the United States so you can earn passive income, grow your capital, and benefit from real estate tax breaks without owning or managing property yourself. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Rozenfeld, founder and managing partner of Freshwater Investments. And today my guest is fellow Thunderbird alum Blaine Yates. Blaine is a co-founder of Xlear, the xylitol-based nasal and oral health company many of you have probably seen on store shelves. Over the years, he's worn lots of hats there, from building the company's first sales force to serving as chief executive officer, and later leading their international expansion. In between, he took time off to photograph Vista views from highest point in all 50 US states. Since selling his ownership in 2024, Blaine has been investing in early-stage companies and is now preparing to launch an advanced rehabilitation center in Salt Lake City focused on helping stroke and traumatic brain injury patients to get back to living full lives. Blaine, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Hey, we met just about a month ago in Salt Lake City area. I went to visit Thunderbird ski weekend. It was a great event, and you were hosting one of the evenings at your beautiful place at Sundance, and you even took us on a tour of Sundance Ski Resort, which I'm very grateful for. And I could tell that you love that place. Why is it so special for you, for your family?
Well, I don't know how many of you viewers know much about Utah skiing and Sundance, but we have a beautiful array of resorts here, from the Park City to the way up north in Snow Basin and whatnot, and down through the Cottonwood, all the way to the south. But Sundance it's not one of the big mega resorts. It's much more of a boutique style resort. It's founded sort of by Robert Redford. There was a little ski area there before called Timp Haven. But Robert Redford fell in love with the place way back in the 70s and purchased some of the land around and started developing it. And he envisioned, a beautiful ski area and the beautiful views that you got to see when you were there, but also kind of a haven for artists and filmmakers and authors and writers and whatnot. So when you see Sundance, you see kind of a little look at the past, the rustic log cabins instead of the big mega lodges. And you see, the writers' studios and the directors' studios for gathering and sharing brain trust. And, the Sundance Film Festival was founded there, and it was very small at first. Now first of all, it outgrew Sundance and moved to Park City. And now they've moved it out of Park City. So I think it's going to Boulder, Colorado. But it's a very rustic, it's a smaller resort. You don't get the big crowds, and you don't have high-speed quads everywhere. There's still some of the older chairlifts and after, but it is being updated. There's a lot going on right now. But I love the rustic look. I love the views. I love the smaller resort feel. I met my wife there at Sundance many years ago.
Okay.
And so obviously it holds a special place in our hearts. And when I exited the company I helped found, Xlear, when I exited that company, one of the first things we did is we got a place up there, and that's where we hosted the Thunderbird events. And so now we have a family place, and we love the area even more, I could say.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I could feel that. So I could tell. And
Yes.
that lunch was amazing. Thank you for taking us all the way to the top of the mountain. And yeah, I had a great time. Thank you for that. So let's talk a little bit about your I think it was your hobby or your project, passion project. Well, you took some time off of your high pressure CEO job, and you went and spent a couple years taking pictures from the highest places and across the 50 states in the United States. Let's chat about this. I'm so curious.
Yeah, yeah.
Why you decided to do it, and what's any lessons learned during that process? Kind of life lessons or business lessons?
Yeah, I'll have to think about the lessons side of it. There's kind of a quirky little, fun group, High Pointers Club that focuses on, standing on the high point of each of the 50 states, and they'll take it elsewhere too. They'll go. Some of the people will go do, Everest and Aconcagua in South America, and they'll do the European. The impetus for my wanting to do that actually goes back a couple decades. My I had been in Utah a long time, but when I moved to Utah, I came out to go to university, and so, I did a little bit of hiking and climbing and skiing and whatnot, but, being a university student, then moving straight from that into full-time work, I didn't give a lot of focus. My brothers-in-law had grown up in Utah. I moved here from Missouri, so, some of this stuff came later in my life, and, I didn't start skiing till I was in my 20s, and the same thing with a lot of the mountaineering and climbing. But my brothers-in-law were really dialed in, and they wanted to go climb Mount Rainier, and I had never done anything like that other than we have some pretty beefy local hikes, but I'd never done any mountaineering and, snowy ascents of mountain peaks and whatnot. So I set about training and, getting ready to go climb Mount Rainier with my brothers-in-law, and I had to learn a lot of new skills just for that, a lot of crevasse rescue techniques and traversing glaciers and, not sliding off, and a lot of rope team travel and all that. So really just set about on a fun adventure with my brothers-in-law, training for and then going to climb Mount Rainier. But as we were, I don't know if you're familiar with the alpine starts that you have to do, but on many of these mountains, you will get to a point where you're going to go for the summit and rest up a little bit and eat, and then oftentimes you'll start your ascent at, let's just say midnight to make it easy. For a lot of reasons. A big one is that you kind of want to be up and down before the warmth of the afternoon starts melting things and rocks start to fall and the snow gets more slushy. So you kind of want that cold. And we were with my brothers-in-law, we started our ascent, and it's a pretty good undertaking just getting up to the base camp there. You have a lot of weight, and it's my first time doing it, so you're carrying a heavy pack and you're in crampons. It's a bit tiring, and, we started so, you try to get a little bit of sleep, but you're waking up at 11 to get geared up and get on the trail by midnight, and, we had hoped to be on the summit by sunrise, but we didn't quite make it. We had a pretty different my brothers-in-law and I, but our father-in-law was along, and he was, 65 at the time, but very fit,
Hmm.
and,
Wow.
you know, our rope teams, it's slower going than we thought, and we were doing this together for the first time. Anyway, we weren't quite to the top. We were on a pretty steep, glacial side hill near the top, and we took a little break, and it's right as we took this break, the sun peaked up to the east, and, it was probably the most impactful thing I had seen in my life to that point. I would think I was around 40 years old. I'd, been
Hmm.
in, and a little bit younger than that. I think I was late 30s. And to watch the sun come up over that, all those snowy peaks and across and the blue ice, the sun lighting up some of that blue ice on the glacier. It was just really impactful and like almost, it was very emotional to see. I was like, this is probably the coolest thing I've ever seen with my own eyes, and we still had a little bit to go, but I remember thinking about my family and friends, in particular my parents, who are at the time back in the Midwest where I'm from, and would never have seen anything like that, but also would never have the opportunity to do something like that. And so, I took some pictures and I started thinking about like how sad is that for the not just millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who would never have the opportunity to see a view like that. And then we finished our climb and we made it down safe. We had a few mishaps. My father-in-law lost his ice axe, and that's kind of like one of your main means of stopping yourself if you were to slide. And so we had to keep him a little tighter on the rope and keep a close eye on him. Just some silly things that went along with the adventure, but we made it
Hmm.
down fine. I wasn't in a place in my life when I could do too much about it. Within a couple of years, you asked me about the taking the break from work. You know, I was the CEO of Xlear at that time, and so I was able to take, a few days off and here and there to train and a few days off with the climb and obviously normal vacations. But I thought about it over the next couple of years, and there were a couple of local charitable groups that I was tied into, and the company Xlear was doing regular donations to. And that the idea kind of came to me that I was fit and I had kept up the skills mountaineering and gone to do some other climbs. I'd gone to climb Mount Whitney in winter and a lot of Utah climbs, and Colorado 14ers are a great place to
Hmm.
train, and there are several that are nice. And so I thought, the idea of doing a coffee table book and going off and I thought initially about that view from Mount Rainier, but you also have, you have Mount Hood in Oregon, and you have, Gannett Peak in Wyoming, and in Montana, there's and Idaho, and the whole West really, and even back east. Katahdin, which is the high point in Maine, and Mount Washington. There's all these beautiful views that I felt like I could achieve, but then people like my parents, I'm just using them as an example, but there are a lot,
Hmm.
would never have the chance to see that. So I thought, I could take these pictures and show them, make them available to people who won't have that chance. But I could do it in the coffee table book, and maybe if there's some sales from that, we could direct the funds to these charitable groups that I like. And that's where the idea came. It took a little bit longer to percolate and before I was able to kind of take a break from the corporate world and go work on it. But that's where the idea came from, was that
Yeah,
that
that's
morning with
amazing.
my brothers-in-law going up Mount Rainier and seeing that sunrise over that glacier, and just a crazy view that I saw.
Got it. So can I see these pictures, or can
So
can
they're
we
out
find
there.
the kind?
Yeah, not yet. I wish. It's one of those telltale heart type things where so I did over a couple I finished all the pictures and the edits, and I've got them on a hard drive sitting right over there. And I started on the stories in the book, but then life got in the way. In the middle of this, there was a divorce and some corporate restructuring. And then I started a little side business and then a second family now and a young child. So the pictures are all ready and the book still needs to be compiled. So yeah, they're there. I just need to get them back.
Yeah,
Need to get back.
I'm looking forward to purchase that book.
Yeah. So I keep,
Sometime in the future.
yeah,
No pressure. No,
Uh, yeah, it will get to it. It's been a few years now. It's kind of like my telltale heart. It's over there. I can hear it. I feel it. I need to get to it, but other business opportunities and things keep popping up, and so it keeps sitting there waiting to be finished. So, but
on. All right, let's go back to your beginnings. You mentioned that you grew up in Missouri,
yeah,
in Kansas City. Can you talk a little bit about your family, your parents, your childhood? Yeah, let's start there.
yeah. I had a great childhood and upbringing. I'd say it's a little bit atypical of the normal T-bird. I mean, I think we're kind of focusing this on the T-bird experience in general. And yeah, I grew up out in a small neighborhood in the woods between two small towns outside Kansas City. I could actually get to the top of my hill through the woods, and from the bluff, we overlooked the Missouri River, and off in the distance, you could see Kansas City. But I don't think it was the typical like global leadership bringing, but I grew up building forts out in the woods, and hunting rabbits and squirrels and fishing in the river and the streams that went to the Missouri River. But I always had an affinity for language and cultural communication. When we would have, not in my home, but when we would have foreign exchange students come to my school, I was always one of the ones that was the most interested in where they were from and how they grew up and learning tidbits of the language. And I remember their stories. I had stories of I remember stories of a Palestinian exchange student who came and his talk about swimming in the Mediterranean. And we had a Spanish exchange student who came who was actually from near Barcelona. I was, taking Spanish classes in high school, and she would practice with me, but her first language was actually Catalan. And so she would show me that, and I would see the, the similarity, the kind of mix of French words and Spanish words in it. And so I always had an interest, but I grew up, pretty rugged with blue collar parents, neither of which went to college and worked in fairly blue collar jobs. But I always had a real interest in language and world and culture and world history and whatnot.
But did you have an interest in business? Did you have any hustles or side gigs while in high
It's an
school?
interest, always an interest in business. Yeah. And even as I remember, I grew up with the old in Cub Scouts and then into Boy Scouts. And we would have, we'd go door to door selling candy bars or selling light bulbs. And I would generally be like the top salesperson and win it. And I remember one of them, we were selling light bulbs, which honestly, kind of a great door to door sales hustle. I mean, just selling
Everybody
boxes of
needs
light
them.
bulb. Yeah, everybody uses a light bulb. I haven't had anybody when people come to my door now, like the kids that are selling things in door to door, I have a kind of a special affinity for them, and I'll always see what they're selling. And I haven't seen light bulbs. That would be great. Maybe I should like mention that to some of the neighborhood kids that are always selling stuff. But anyway, I won this competition, and the winner got a 10-speed bicycle. And like I said, I lived in a neighborhood that was a few miles from the two closest town, which you might recognize because I know you have some dealings back in the area. But I lived right between Parkville and Riverside, Missouri, which is right along the Missouri River.
Hmm.
And but with that bicycle, I was able to get into the towns, and so I would ride my bicycle into towns, and I would buy things to resell in the neighborhood. And I remember at one point around the 4th of July, I would go into the fireworks stands and buy as many fireworks as I could carry, come back, and I'd set up a little mini stand in my driveway. And, it was only over a few week period, but during that few week period, I remember I was making more daily than my parents were making. And I was like,
Wow.
I was a 12-year-old kid.
So it must have been a
Yeah.
revelation. Like I don't need to go that route. Like
Yeah.
I would need to start a business.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I'd say my first like slap in the face on entrepreneurship versus not is I would always, I had neighborhood lawns that I mowed. I had kids that I babysat. In the winter, I shoveled driveways. And then my fireworks stand, like I said, this is back in the early 80s. But I remember my dad worked for the gas company and he was a service guy. My mom worked for the phone company and she was an operator. Like back then you called and, looking for someone's phone number. She did that. And I remember running the fireworks stand and I did all my, I had my cost of goods and then how much I had my little ledger. And I remember on when I was doing all my math and I made like $80 one day.
Hmm.
And I knew how much my parents made hourly in their jobs. And I was looking at that and I said, I made like significantly more than my dad made that day selling the fireworks. And I had like a couple weeks of that where, I would sell my inventory, get on my bike, run to town, make a little deposit at the bank, buy my fireworks and go back. And then obviously outside of that, mowing lawns and doing things and how much I would make a day mowing lawns. And as soon as I was old enough to get a job, I went and got a job. And I was working at Hardee's, which is, I think they're now more like Carl's Jr. And I remember working and I was picking up extra shifts. And my first 2 months there, I was the employee of the month. And I remember getting my first paycheck. And I got my first paycheck, and I think it was for like $100 or something like that. And I remember looking at this paycheck and going, I worked my butt off all day. I'm going to school, but at the night and the next, and I could have made this much in like a day mowing lawns. I was like this. So it was I knew at some point that I needed to do my own thing. That working for someone else, the money was going to someone else.
So I guess that's a great segue to your chapter a little bit forward in the future with the Xlear company. Can you or one of the co-founders of the company? So let's dive into that big story that defined your life for the next couple decades.
Yeah. So when I was be a little bit of a lead into the founding of Xlear, but when I was, off to university, I had I grew up Mormon, and so that and I've since given it up, but I grew up Mormon and I did a Mormon mission and I was Spanish speaking. And so
Mhm.
I I always had been studying Spanish, and I had some Spanish family, like ancestry as well. My grandmother spoke a little bit. But when I did that Mormon volunteer work or the missionary service, it was in Spanish. So I started developing language skills, and I went to university which is what brought me to Utah. As I went to Brigham Young University, and again, I had always had an affinity for cultures and language, and so my undergraduate was in international relations, it's a political science type, and also Spanish. So I was working on my language then, and even at that point, I had my eye on Thunderbird. I knew about Thunderbird, and I really didn't enjoy business classes. I
Hmm.
didn't enjoy, accounting, and, I saw the need for it, but I started out majoring in business, and I just did not enjoy the coursework at all. And I did enjoy the political science type classes and the more history, and so I switched to international relations and Spanish, but I worked full time the whole time I was in college because I just didn't have financial backing, and I really am anxious about having a lot of debt. So I worked full time so I could kind of keep up. And after college, the company I was working for hired me on. And so I went from project management into a sales side, and if you know the Mormon story much, at BYU, I was married young and had a child fairly young, and I had become a sales manager at this company, and I remember I was, home, my daughter was sick, and I was home, and I had my daughter on one hip, and I had the phone in my ear, and I was negotiating a contract with a client, and my daughter was little at the time, a toddler and fussy. And I remember I just told the client, I was like, I said, like, can I call you back? I'm dealing with at home. And the client was very understanding. It was not a problem at all. It was just like, yeah, call me back when you get her down for a nap. It was that type of client. We had a good relationship. Trying to finish their contract, but with a fussy toddler wasn't working. And my brother knocked on the door and came over with a friend of his, and his hung up the phone and opened the door, and they came in, and I was like, she's got another ear infection. She was getting these middle ear infections every couple months, and we were having issues with her being like resistant to different antibiotics because was sick so often. And it was just this strange, serendipitous type, whatever you want to call it. My brother's friend said, "Oh, that's interesting." He goes, "My dad's a doctor." And he said, "Have you heard about xylitol?" And I had not. I was like, "No, don't know what that is." He said, "Well, it's a sweetener. It's a sugar alcohol." And he went into the description and he said, it's actually used in like sugar-free chewing gum and gums and some candies. And they found a really solid dental benefit to using the sweetener." And he went into a little story about the molecular structure of the sweetener and how the bacteria that causes tooth decay, it looks like food. It looks like a sugar, like sucrose, like your table sugar to it. But it's a little bit different molecularly in that structure. The bacteria will ingest xylitol, but to keep it in layman's terms, it kind of gives it indigestion. It can't break it down like it could a sugar, and because it can't break it down, the bacteria is weakened. For one, it's wasting all this energy trying to digest this food molecule. But from a dental perspective, it does a couple of really important things. And one is when that bacteria, it's a strep bacteria called strep mutans. When that bacteria breaks down sugar, it releases an acid, which lowers the pH in your mouth and makes your mouth acidic, which is what eats away at your teeth and causes cavities. And the bacteria also produces a sticky substance. It's like known as a biofilm. And when the bacteria are fed xylitol, they can't break it down. They can't make the biofilm. So they don't stick well. They don't colonize well. And the bacteria doesn't produce that acid. So the pH stays healthy. Your mouth is not acidic. Your teeth are able to mineralize. So with the bacteria not sticking well, your mouth is able to wash it away more readily. So the
Hmm.
colonization is lower. And without producing the acid, the pH is better. But he said, well, I won't go into too much of that, the dental benefit, but the dental benefits of xylitol are pretty fantastic. And he said, but they were doing some studies on underserved populations and more in countries where they don't have access to the same dental care we would here in the US or most of Europe. So Belize in particular, and some places in South America and Africa. And they were studying the dental benefits of xylitol. And they were using xylitol syrups, they were using xylitol gum, lozenges with xylitol, seeing if it was an inexpensive way to fight tooth decay in countries that didn't have the same oral hygiene that we do, the brushing and flossing and the regular dental checkups and fluoride treatments for your teeth and all that. They found that it worked well. They were seeing, 70, 80% reduction in tooth decay in the test groups. But an interesting side note was the kids weren't getting as many middle ear infections. And, ENTs and family doctors know that those infections come from the eustachian tubes and the sinuses. And so they were seeing some benefit and they didn't really understand. They were studying xylitol's effect on strep mutans, the cavity causing bacteria. But sinus in adults and ear infection in kids are caused by different bacteria. Um, Haemophilus influenza, Moraxella catarrhalis, and strep pneumo are the strains. So those dental studies prompted some follow-up studies, and I think University of Iowa, there was a researcher named Joseph Zabner who did one, and several other studies. But they wanted to look at what xylitol did to those bacteria, the bacteria that cause sinus and ear infection. And they found that all of them, to different degrees, lost their ability to stick, to produce that biofilm when they ingested xylitol. So it's a bit of a story getting there, but there was this friend of my brother's who came to visit. His name was Nate Jones. His dad was a family doctor in Texas, and he had 20 patients who were coming in every couple months with another ear infection, another round of antibiotics, but he was seeing the problems. He was seeing that the parents are missing work, the kids are missing school. When a child has an ear infection, they can't hear well. And so they a lot of these kids, and this is globally, not just the 20 in his practice, but
Right.
it's they end up with like, speech issues because they don't hear what they're not hearing and processing well. So his wife was a speech therapist, and his wife was nagging him one day. And I'm not saying anything about wives and husbands. It's just the wife was like, "You've got to do something better. You can't just let him get sick all the time. You're not really helping by just so you got to look for a way to keep them from getting sick, not just treat them after they're sick." So he started researching, and this is back in the 90s. And if world history gets involved in the 90s, the internet was becoming more
Yeah.
popular, and email and sharing things, and research was getting put up online instead of having to like order a paper from the university that you read an abstract in the medical journal. All this is coming
Yeah.
online and being digitized. He started, and interestingly enough, that's what my company before was doing. When I was negotiating that contract, I worked for a company that was automating libraries. That's just a side. tie. It doesn't not to do with the story. But my brother's friend now, and his dad was a doctor. He had started looking into preventing ear infections and just digging through research that was coming online now, where university libraries were digitizing their paper reports and whatnot. And he found this dental study on xylitol and how, weird side note, these kids that were chewing xylitol gum weren't getting as many ear infections. And then he found some follow-up studies that showed that xylitol had a similar effect to the dental bacteria on the nasal bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
And so he just, light bulb moment for him. This is Dr. Jones, Lon Jones, out in Plainview, Texas. He thought, they're getting all that benefit from oral xylitol. I should try getting it in their nasal cavity. And so he went down to the health food store, which was the only place you could find xylitol back then. Now you can find it in the grocery stores and online everywhere. And then he went to the pharmacy and bought just a general saline nasal spray. I think it was Ocean, which is everywhere. And he did a lot of research on the right concentrations. They had talked about, for the bacterial adhesion reduction, that they were using a 5% xylitol solution. And he did some different calculations, but he developed like kind of a home brew, like at home
Mm-hmm.
nasal spray, and he started using it in his practice. It was just, popping the cap off of saline. He bought it at the pharmacy, mixing in xylitol, and having parents at his medical practice use it on the kids. And these kids just kind of stopped getting ear infections. And so he said, I need to take this to market. But he was older at the time, and he was a doctor, and he was busy. And he had 14 children. And he said, I got to see if one of my kids wants this. So he put it out. And his son, Nate, who became my business partner in Xlear, and actually he's the main founder. It was his product. I assisted. Um, he said, I would like to take this to market. Let me give it a shot. And so his dad said, great. And so Nate Jones is standing in my condo living room talking to me about this. And I said, well, if you need help when you take this to market, I would love to help. And he went out and spent some time looking for investors. He had a hard time because it's essentially sugar water, right?
Yeah.
And investors are looking for a pharma. And he was talking to big consumer products companies like Johnson and Johnson and pharma companies, and they all kind of said, there's no drug, there's no hook. You don't have years of research, and you don't have this and that, and he just was having a hard time finding a fit. And I said, well, why don't we just get out and start talking to doctors? And so I put some of the seed money into the company and helped him with his elevator pitch and his messaging. And we set up a
And
little.
you were not concerned that all these big companies said no to your to your co-founder. It was not a obstacle for you.
No, and I think the reason was I had personal experience with it, right? I left out a little key part of that. Aside from Dr. Jones's experience in his practice, Nate Jones went and got me a couple bottles to use with my daughter. Like I said, she was getting sick every 6-8 weeks. We had another round of ear infections. Started using it with my daughter, and immediately she was breathing better and feeling better. And it's not a drug. It doesn't like kill, it's not an antibiotic or anything like that. It's just a way to wash the bacteria out and keep your nose clean. But it lets your body fight it much more effectively because it's
Right.
lowering the bacterial load, right? And your body can handle it better. Anyway, she got better pretty quickly. And we used it over the next few months, and she didn't get another infection. And that's when I was talking to him and saying, this stuff seems to work pretty well. If you want to take this to market, I would love to get involved. And he said, well, I'm out talking to investor groups. I'm probably going to go raise a couple million, and we'll take this thing big. And he was finding that he was having a hard time getting investors. Again, it's not a drug. It's not a pharma product. How does this fit in the marketplace? But I kept using it with my daughter, and she never got another middle ear infection. And
Wow.
almost a year later, he wasn't ready to throw in the towel, but he wasn't getting any investors. He wasn't getting any big investment money. He wasn't having any luck talking to pharma companies or consumer products companies. So we were just talking and I said, let's just get out and talk to some doctors and tell them what we're doing and talk to some pharmacists. And so yeah, I didn't have any hesitation because I had firsthand experience that the product worked great, and at least for us. And I know from Dr. Jones's practice, it worked great. So I just felt like if we could get enough people using it, enough people talking about it, that it would work. And he felt that way too. Um, so, I put the quote unquote seed money into the company. It wasn't a lot, it wasn't, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, but enough to rent a little one room office and a couple thousand for office furniture and phone lines and, a couple plane tickets to go out to medical conventions and get a little table and start talking to people. And we didn't actually find a great fit with doctors either because they're so trained in treating illness and
Versus preventing it.
yeah, not they didn't not as much focus in the preventive side. This is now also this was back in 1999, 2000. I do feel like there's much more of a focus on that now than there was, but there wasn't. But we did find a really um, interested group, and that was in the health food stores, and people who are interested in prevention and um, non-drug therapies and staying healthy without a quote unquote big pharma. They love the story. And so we're actually at medical convention and a couple of more naturopathically minded, I'd say,
Hmm.
doctors came by and we got introduced to a doctor who was more of a naturopathic doctor named David Williams, who at the time had a huge following. And back then it was like newsletters, right? This was before blogs and this was before the modern world and apps and blogs and social media. But he had a newsletter that he sent out monthly with a couple 100,000 subscribers.
Hmm.
And we were getting a little bit of traction in health food stores and local pharmacies here in local by us where we could walk in and talk to them and tell the pharmacist the story. And they go, oh, that's cool. Like, I'll try it out. And they'd buy a box, they'd buy, a dozen and talk to their
Hmm.
patients. If they had customers coming in with like sinus issues or kids with ear infections, they would talk. So we were getting a little bit of traction, but the sales were like, you know, a few $1,000s a month. Like it was enough to like pay the rent and the on a one room office and the bills. But when we got introduced through one of our, friend of a friend to Dr. David Williams, he he said, this is something everybody should have in their medicine cabinet. Everybody should have this. Like there's a lot of issues with antibiotic dependencies and antibiotic resistance and people and doctors are prescribing antibiotics for everything when really if you just give your body a chance, over a few days you might start feeling better. And he was big on things that would lessen the need for antibiotic prescription, I'll say. It was a big focus of his.
Hmm.
And Nate Jones finally got in touch with him and they talked and he's like, this could be the next best thing to sliced bread in the medical world. And so he put us in his newsletter and he said, look, you've been talking to like a local pharmacy, local health food stores. You're able to go out and visit a handful of them weekly. And he said, but this is going to go out to like 200,000 people. And they are people who are like-minded people. So you got to get ready for this. And Nate
Hmm.
had the foresight to say, oh, that's a little bigger than me sitting him off of with one phone. And so he went out in front of this newsletter publication and hired a few people and installed a phone system that could handle multiple calls coming in and talked to somebody about order processing because we're doing 5 or 6 orders a day by hand and boxes. And I think that was the real launch of the company. That newsletter went out and the phone lines lit up and sales went from, 2 to 3 to maybe $5,000 a month to, 50 to $100,000 the next week. Overwhelming and all hands on deck. Get your friends in here.
Hmm.
We need help taking calls. We need help packing orders. We need help printing labels. And so I think that was the real launch of the company. And we built the company then. We decided that health food was our real focus. And so that's when we started really going out and talking to the health food crowd, the health food stores. And that's when I came in. I left my day job. I was with the company that was automating libraries. I left that job and went to be the sales manager at Xlear and actually build a sales force. We had enough sales now that we could pay salaries to salespeople and commissions. And so we started bringing in a broker network, and they started introducing us to put it in terms that people will understand now, they started introducing us to the Sprouts and the Whole Foods instead of just the small local, mom and pops we've been talking to.
How,
And that
how
was
did you
really
how did you I'm curious, how did your conversation with Whole Foods go? Was it easy to get in and kind of sign up with Whole Foods?
uh, it wasn't easy, but it
It
went
was
well.
probably the largest health store at that time.
At that time, yeah, yeah, I think Sprouts and Whole Foods, and there were some regional chain. What's become Natural Grocers now was a chain in Colorado, and there were quite a few. We didn't go right into Whole Foods. We built it through mom and pops first, and some of the smaller regional chains, like the one that's become Natural Grocers now in Colorado. We found a good, nice following around Boulder, Colorado, and in California, the Bay Area, and in general areas that were more natural products focused, we did well. It was a couple of years in before we went and pitched Whole Foods, and by that time we had the infrastructure built up and the sales team. Our broker, Whole Foods at that time, you sold to the different regions. It hadn't consolidated around Austin, Texas, and it hadn't been bought by Jeff Bezos at the time. So Whole Foods wasn't really one sales call. You had to sell into each of the individual regions. And so it was, each Whole Foods region was like a, a new account call and setup. And there was a new buyer that didn't know about you and you didn't have the real. So it took some time to get nationwide in Whole Foods, but we did it over a couple of years. And once it's like selling well in one or two Whole Foods regions, the other ones were much more amenable to the messaging.
Hmm.
But that was my job. When I went to Xlear, I went there to build the sales force. Initially, we started with independent brokers, and then we brought in more in-house sales teams, and yeah, it was exciting and fun. And we were starting from ground zero, and we built it to a national brand through the health food channels. But it did start like over the years. There would be a pharmacist here and there that would order it. And so we focused on the health food channel, but we did register it with the big pharmaceutical distributors. So, we over the years we would there would be enough interest in the pharmacy that McKesson would want to carry it. And so we registered with McKesson and we registered with Cardinal and AmerisourceBergen. And we started establishing those relationships, though we weren't actively targeting the pharmacy chains. There were pharmacists out there that customers were going in and requesting it, or their doctor. We did a lot of medical and dental conventions and educating doctors about our little product for preventing sinus and ear infection. Doctors in general at the time in general weren't big on sending their patients to the health food store. They viewed health food stores as, well, you're just as likely to, buy some crystal and
Right.
some crazy herb from South America. And a lot of doctors weren't big on that, but they would send them to the pharmacy. And so we developed little tear sheets where the pharmacy had the McKesson codes where they could just bring it in. And so we started like kind of organically going into the pharmacy chains without really focusing on the pharmacy chains.
Yeah. So what would you say were like biggest challenges in scaling this company?
Well,
Except building the sales organization.
yeah, for Xlear, it was just that nobody had heard the word xylitol and knew what it was. There was no awareness on. If in the early 2000s, it's changed now. There's much more awareness now, and a lot of that is attributable to Xlear, and I would say Nate Jones' vision for. We would go to medical conventions where we knew we weren't going to sell a single product, but we knew that we had to educate medical and dental professionals about the benefits of xylitol. And we would get some interest. Like I said, we would send them with prescription pads like tear sheets, where one of their patients could actually take a tear sheet into the pharmacy and they could order it directly from McKesson, Cardinal, AmerisourceBergen.
Hmm.
It was education. It was educating medical and dental professionals about the benefits of xylitol, but at the same time, there was no consumer awareness of the benefits of xylitol. So we spent years and millions of dollars on both consumer education on one side, but on the other side, educating those who would recommend it, dentists and dental hygienists and doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners in the ENT clinics and kind of a focus on ENT and pediatrics because it's just, we would go to like the head and neck surgery conventions and things like that. And it great. We did a lot more educating than selling, but 10 years later, you start to, the all those seeds that you planted start to pop up around the country. And what happened, like I said, we were in pharmacy, but we weren't focusing on pharmacy chains. Our big customers were, and I'm talking, all the way into 2010, 11, 12. We're 12 years in. We finally started going to some of the shows where we would talk to the big pharmacy chains, to Walgreens, Rite Aid, CVS, Target with their pharmacies and whatnot, Walmart. And we started popping up in there. But when we started doing, we initially, I think the first pharmacy chain that took a leap with us, which was after I had left the sales. And it's actually as I was getting ready to take my little break in like 2012, 13, is CVS was the first one to say, I think there's enough interest in this. Let's bring it in. So CVS brought us in. And the first few years were a real struggle to get the turns that they required. Like we were barely making it. One of our lines, one of our SKUs didn't, and it got discontinued. But then one of them was doing well enough that they kept it. And they were, to give them credit, the CVS corporate, they were pretty big on the potential benefits of the nasal spray. So they gave us a little leeway. I don't think they would have given everyone and kept us in there. And when COVID hit in 2020, all of a sudden the whole world got focused on prevention and not getting sick.
Yeah.
And during those first few years, the 2020 into 2023, our little nasal spray was actually the number one selling nasal spray in Walgreens, for instance, for a while. I mean,
Wow.
it's since COVID subsided and that's gone down, the big multi-billion dollar pharmacy backed, there's sprays in there that are owned by, Church and Dwight and GlaxoSmithKline and all that. We've dropped back a little bit, but clear nasal spray still does really well in CVS and Walgreens. And like I said, for a moment in time there, it was the number one selling nasal spray. It was,
Congrats.
long, long, long time. And honestly, have to give credit to my business partner at the time, even though we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things we butted heads, but he was very adamant on spending the time and money on both consumer and professional education.
Great. Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about your Thunderbird story.
Oh yeah.
So you building this company, you CEO of the company, and in 2009 you decided to get a Thunderbird degree, the executive MBA at Thunderbird.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that thought came about, and why did it cross your mind?
So I'll backtrack a little bit to my time at BYU, at Brigham Young University. When I graduated with a degree in international relations and Spanish. My intent was to jump right into an MBA. I had that. I spoke Spanish fluently. I had a nice proficiency with languages. I could get by in Portuguese, and I would pick up a book in French and read it, and then look up the words I didn't know, and for the most part. And I actually wanted to go to Thunderbird. This is, I graduated in 1992, but I found myself starting a family and needing to pay bills and feed a family more than I needed to continue my education. Like I said, I was working full time while I went to college. As soon as I graduated, the company I worked for offered me a bigger position with the salary, and I actually moved out of project management and into the sales side of the world. And then Yeah, I really I couldn't just go right back to school. I needed to, needed to pay rent and buy groceries and, make car payments and all that. So it took a little bit of a back seat, and, I just went into the business world, and I moved in 1996. I moved from project management and into a sales position, and I immediately got recruited away by a competitor. And that's the company. I had my daughter on my hip, and I was negotiating a contract. And then I did well. I was one of the top salespeople, and they made me a sales manager. And then we decided to start a company in '99, 2000. We started Xlear, and so then we're in an early stage company, and I'm busy with that and building. Like I said, I always had in the back of my mind I wanted to do an MBA, and I had in mind Thunderbird was a big one, and I think University of Texas at Austin and UCLA had the programs. I wanted to be globally focused. I always had that affinity, and I wanted a business degree, and I actually, as I graduated BYU, I when I started looking at those programs, I actually applied before was getting accepted when I found out I had a child on the way. And I had been accepted to UT Austin and UCLA. It's either UCLA or Pepperdine. I applied to both, and anyway, I got accepted into the programs I wanted to get accepted to, and then I had to say I'm not coming. I gotta stay working. So we started Xlear, and again, I was just busy with different things, with starting a business and a family, and then running a business. And when we started Xlear again, I came on board to run sales, and kind of we it was just my business partner and me and a few other people, and so I was the sales manager, and then I titled myself VP of sales, and so and he was the president and the CEO, but he was busy with some side projects, and he had hired somebody he thought would be the CEO, and it didn't work out. And so we were talking, and I was there on the day to day. I was there running sales, but also working with the operations people to make sure my clients were taken care of, and working with the marketing people to make sure the messaging fit our sales messaging. And we were talking one day, and he said, I'm busy over here, and this guy that we hired to run the company is not really working out. Why don't you just run the company? So, I was running sales for a handful of years, and then I became the CEO of the company in 2000. And we were, growing from just a few million years up to the 20 million mark, and from a handful of employees up to 100 employees. And I was busy, but I always had in my mind that I wanted a master's degree, and I wanted it to be globally focused. And I was the CEO of the company, so a business program that was globally focused like made perfect sense. And so in 2009, I said, I can run this company and do a master's degree as long as it's the right program. And Thunderbird had an executive program where we were, it was very compressed. It was over 18 months, actually a little less, and it was every other weekend in Glendale, and then 3 overseas, cohort visits and whatnot. And so I talked to my business partner and my vice presidents, the guy running sales and the lady running marketing and the finance team and all that. And I said, I think I can do this, right? And they're like, yeah, we can. You can be gone for a few days here and there, and a couple weeks here and there. And it was 2009. Like cell phones and email. Like I could be in Geneva or Moscow or Lima, Peru, and I could still be running the company while I was taking classes and stuff. So I did the executive program, and it worked really well. And I would fly down on a Thursday night for Friday and Saturday classes in Glendale, and fly back Sunday evening. And my brother lived in the Phoenix area, and he had young kids, so it was nice for me to go out down and do my classes, and then see my brother and my nieces and nephews, and then fly back and run the company during the week, and then every other weekend down in Glendale. And I
That's
had a
that's great.
cohort
And
of 50. Go ahead.
did your approach to running a company change in any way after finishing your executive MBA? Did
Yeah,
you
no, I
apply any lessons from Thunderbird to Xlear?
So we applied. I think a lot of things. I would say this. I would say when you're running a company for several years, and I had been running the sales side of things, and before that I had been a project manager, and then sales, and then I became the CEO. And during that time we had to buy land and build a new headquarters, and so I had a lot of like practical business experience, right? I had a pretty good concept of finance and financing, and we had worked with banks on buying the land and building the building, and so I feel like I had a pretty good business head. But the Thunderbird experience was fantastic. A lot of things on the operational side in the operations classes where I had a VP of operations, and we had production managers and shipping managers and procurement managers. I had a team, but when we ran through some of our operational classes, we would have to do case studies, and I would actually like bring a classmate up to Utah, and we would go in and film some of the processes we were going through, and I would take them back to my class, and we would analyze the video, and then I would take recommendations. And so we did a lot of like efficiency
That's amazing.
enhancing things because of the classwork. And then, even on the finance side, you know, we never had to like float bonds and get financing that way. We were able to get bank loans and things, but we learned a lot about what's behind the scenes. And so then back with my finance team, when we were doing big capital projects, we'd have to bring in hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment or build a new clean room, and it'd be a couple million. And so learned a lot on the finance side about how to do that. And honestly, talking to financiers and bankers, I think, I think we were much more educated and able to get better terms than we could have before. But the big thing was the networking. While I was at Thunderbird, my classmates were from all over the globe, that's just the standard at Thunderbird. But when we wanted to expand into new countries, I immediately had, men and women with really strong ties in Mexico and back in Europe. We had French and Spanish and Polish classmates and a Russian classmate. And so I immediately had someone who came from generally a well-connected business family in a different country, a point of entry where I could say, can you help me find the big, you know, who's importing into your country with strong ties into the pharmacies? And so the alumni network was like really uh, growing our business. And why, when I had left for a couple years in 2014 to 16, I was still the CEO into 2014. And then I stepped back, and we had hired somebody who I had working as my CFO for a couple of years to run the company. And I was felt that I had built the business at the point where, and I had enough ownership that I actually could not work and just get by on the quarterly dividends and go do some other things. And I decided to do this photography project, but we decided we wanted to really build our international network. So in 2016, I came back, but with a focus on building our global business. And I immediately started working my Thunderbird contacts. And our biggest customer right out of the gate was not one of my classmates, but one of the local alumni chapter ran an export business, buying U.S. products and selling all over the Middle East. And he became our
What
biggest.
country was it?
He so he had been the export manager for a large company called Nutraceutical Corp. So he had built a network all over the Middle East. He saw it wasn't one country. He bought
God.
products in the US and then exported them to his customers in the UAE, in Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. And so he became one customer, but through him, access to 8 different countries, and pretty quickly became our biggest international customer. And then one of my classmates had nice contacts back in India, and he became a customer buying our products and exporting to India. And so the alumni network actually became probably the biggest benefit. A lot of
For
business fine
international
tuning
expansion.
and efficiencies. But when we were able to start selling in other countries, the alumni network was just great. It was like plug and play. I got a guy kind of thing, you know? So, yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm sorry to that the time is running out for us, but and I still have so many questions. Maybe we'll have to do part two sometime in the future. But what message do you have for our Thunderbird community? I know you well connected. You're still working and investing with Thunderbird alumni. Do you have anything to say to our broader community?
Yeah, I think for a while I was so busy after I graduated with running the company and family things and whatnot that I didn't plug in as tightly as I should have to the local alumni network. And so I was using like my classmates and whatnot. But there's just immense value in your local first Tuesday. Here in Utah, it's the first Thursday, but your local network. And then to this day, if I was looking for an attorney in Peru a couple of weeks ago, and I just looked up the Lima alumni chapter head, contacted them. He said, "Oh, my best friends are attorneys." I just that just keep your ties to that alumni network because it's invaluable for so many different reasons.
Excellent. What advice would you give to a 20-year-old self having all that experience you have right now?
I would say spend as much time as you can learning about other cultures and business environments because the cultural awareness and cultural I can't remember what the term is, but the cultural like the intercultural cross-cultural communications classwork at Thunderbird was to me the most interesting and the area where think I think you can benefit the most by learning how other cultures work and learning you've got to slow down and take your time in some cultures. And other cultures want to get right to business. And I think a lot of deals don't work because the person that is sent to deal with it just loses their mind. If you're in Latin America and you're dealing with the we have a meeting at 2 o'clock type person, or if you're working in the Middle East and you're thinking that the deal is going to come to fruition after a couple meetings because we worked out the deals and not realizing that it's going to take getting to be friends and like part of that business is family. I think just learning that you've got to work differently wherever you are and taking the time to learn about the culture and the people and the customs and everything from how the schedules work to just I say closing a deal is different in every country of the world, and you've got to be flexible and learn to roll with the punches.
Awesome. Awesome. And what's your, my last question, what's your next dream travel destination?
Travel destination.
Yes.
Goodness.
You've covered probably half of the planet or maybe even more already, but do you have a place that you would love to visit
Well,
or a mountain to conquer?
I will say this. No, I mean I love climbing mountains. I'm gonna actually turn this towards you, Alex. My dream would be to go visit a rebuilt Ukraine. I just am heartbroken over the garbage that's going on in this world. I would love to go out and raise some money for the rebuilding and then go back and be able to see a peaceful rebuilding Ukraine. That would be a dream. That would be great.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I've seen um, your post on Facebook. You were actively raising money when the war started.
It's been a
Definitely
while
think,
now. It's like there's
yeah,
so much going
de-
on.
definitely thank you for that, and thank you for the thought about Ukraine. And hopefully we can make this trip together sometime,
I would love
sometime soon.
I would love to. I don't know how we pull it off, but I would love to.
Thank you, Blaine. It was a great conversation. It's an honor to meet you and to speak with you. And congratulations on your success, and good luck with your investments and future endeavors.
You as well. I know you're in a lot of things. So right back at you. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.